Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some pathofexile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 4 of Teaser season for patch 3.29 and the upcoming Curse of the Allflame expansion. Some of you might be looking for the day 3 video. Well, guess what? There wasn't one. Day 3, Granny Games decided not to put out any information, or they did put out a tiny little thing about an MTX, but that's not particularly important. So I didn't end up doing a video then. This is the 3rd video in the series, even though it is the day 4 one. Today, Granny Games decided to give a glow up to a unique item that you've probably had drop for you once or twice. It is a very rare item. It's a tier 1 item in the current game. It will probably stay a tier 1 item after these changes. So that means that it's something like maybe 4 to 5 times as common as Mage Blood, maybe 12 times as rare as Cold Iron Point, something of that sort of ballpark figure. The currently existing version of Tidebreaker in the game is not very good. The new version, post this change, is also not very good. This is not the reason for this teaser. This teaser has been given to really talk about 2 other changes that are being made. One of them is a major quality of life improvement to an existing single skill, and the other one is a moderate quality of life improvement for everyone, but one that's going to be even better for newer players. So let's start with the first of these 2 changes. The first of these 2 changes is the Animate Guardian improvement. So you can see Bob here. Bob is the Animate Guardian, he's a friend, and he goes around and fights with whatever gear that you put on him. At the moment, the way of doing this is incredibly clunky, and it also results in a number of times where it's really difficult to get Bob to use specific item combinations that you want, and as a result, Bob is seen as something that is just a chore to deal with by a lot of players. Well, Bob is now getting a version of the interface that existed in patch 3.26 Mercenaries League. Here you can see that Bob has been given this Tidebreaker, as well as rare items in several other slots. It's interesting to see rare items equipped to an Animate Guardian here, and I haven't seen much discussion of this online. Rare items, generally speaking, would not go on an Animate Guardian. They generally don't have that much to offer compared to what you can get by instead equipping unique items there, particularly unique items that either grant buffs to characters that are in their presence, or alternately unique items that provide a multiplicative layer of defenses. So that's something that's interesting to notice here, and might hint at some sort of larger overhaul that might be going on. But Animate Guardian is getting much more user-friendly, and this is going to be something that people who play minion builds will be very happy to see. Honestly, Animate Guardian and Spectre clunkiness is the main reason that I generally avoid minion builds. There is definitely power there, but so much of the entire archetype's power is tied to you having an Animate Guardian and Spectres, and dealing with all of the unfun clunk that's associated with those mechanics. And as a result, you end up feeling like you're hopelessly behind if you don't engage with these mechanics, but at the same time, you also find they're not very fun to engage with. All of that out of the way, that is the changes that are taking place when we talk about Animate Guardian. But possibly the bigger change, or certainly the one that will affect more players, is this little box down here. It's not so much the Brine charges themselves, because they're only available in conjunction with a weapon that is not very good. It is instead the fact that we're getting that pathofexile 2 tech of things that you can mouse over and click inside descriptions. And once you've done that, you get this in-game description of complex mechanics. This is exceptionally good when you are discovering the game, but it's also something that's good just for reminders and to check whether something important has changed or not. For example, a couple of patches ago, the mechanics of endurance charges were changed. And whilst I don't actually see an underline under the term endurance charge here, it wouldn't surprise me if you can also mouse over endurance charge and pop up something like this. And then if you were someone who was a returning player, or you just hadn't paid much attention to the patch notes when that change took place, you might notice that endurance charges are better than you remembered. This is something that's a big quality of life improvement. The more of a veteran player you are, the less important this is, because the more likely you are to already know any individual tooltip that's going around. But even then, it's definitely useful to have. Finally, let's talk about Tidebreaker itself as a weapon. Should you equip this weapon? Almost always the answer is no. So let's talk about using it as a weapon to attack enemies directly with. It has moderate physical DPS, so you're looking 350 physical damage per hit here. This then does scale up to 420 because you can get quality on it. On top of that, you're getting endurance charge on melee stun, which you're probably going to get 36 or 40% from as well, and that will be multiplicative with everything else. However, the problem here is we're only looking at 600 and something DPS at this point. That's the physical damage aspect. I also want to point out that this socketed gems are supported by level 20 endurance charge on melee stun. Obviously, this only applies to your skill that is socketed inside Tidebreaker. So if you have something else in your chest as well, then it's not going to work there. That's fine if you're using a slam skill in your weapon and you've got your automatic Warcry set up inside your chest. So it's not like it's necessarily a big deal breaker, but it means that certain setups will be even further behind on this weapon than you might have otherwise thought. And whilst you are getting some damage out of these brine charges, potentially 40% fizz added as cold, 40% fizz added as lightning, I feel like this is only really moderately competitive with Kaom's Primacy. Now, Kaom's Primacy is a fine weapon. I'm not saying that Kaom's Primacy is a pile of junk, but Kaom's Primacy is something that you don't want to use forever. It's something you want to use now and then eventually upgrade past later. And I feel like that's where Tidebreaker is, but unfortunately, Tidebreaker is going to be rarer than Kaom's Primacy. Primacy was actually made substantially rarer in a recent patch, but even with that in mind, it's very accessible, even day 2 of a league. And while it fits in slightly different builds to Tidebreaker, I think they're of comparable overall power. And when something is as rare as Tidebreaker is, just being as good as Kaom's Primacy isn't going to get there. So I don't think that many people are going to equip this item. It's kind of cool that it's got a bit of a gloss up. Hopefully some of the other gloss ups end up landing a bit better than this one does, because I really don't think this is here. Now, one other way people have talked about using Tidebreaker a little bit online that I'm not sold on is as a spellcaster buffer. Now, you definitely can't use this directly to cast spells, but in conjunction with the Battlemage mechanic, which you can get through your Ascendancy, you can then potentially have this 50% chance to gain a brine charge instead of an endurance charge, and this can provide you with a fair chunk of physical damage added as extra cold and lightning, and Tidebreaker does provide a fair amount of physical damage. However, I want to encourage you, if you're thinking of doing this, to instead consider Disintegrator. Disintegrator, I think, does the same thing. Not exactly the same because it's chaos damage instead of adding on lightning and cold damage, but I do think it does the same thing and does so better. And Disintegrator also comes with Battlemage built in. It has its own challenges as well. You've got to deal with this physical damage per second that you suffer if you've used a skill recently, but all of that is manageable. And I feel like Disintegrator is just the overall better package. Plus, Disintegrator comes from a target farmable boss, whereas Tidebreaker in the current game is a tier 1 drop anywhere unique, aka the second rarest category of drop anywhere uniques, and I don't see any indication that it's going to be made more common in this patch. The big news today is definitely in the two things that aren't the main focus of the announcement: the Animate Guardian upgrades and the improvements to the experience of reading text without having to go outside the game in order to do so. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.